This is your mom?
Yeah. She was a film star with...
Cairo, we're here in the heart of Cairo. You are a true resident of the city. We would think that since everything in Egypt is so old and goes back thousands of years, we would think that Cairo is probably the same. But how did the city happen to be?
The city essentially came, I mean, look, we have something called Fustat, which is slightly before the city was designed. The city of Cairo is actually a designed city. It was designed as an official city by the Fatimids. It had walls, but it's still a city for functionaries, for the military barracks, for the rulers, but it's not the city of their merchants. The merchants were still in the old city of Fustat. And actually Fustat, which doesn't exist anymore, Fustat was a city that had grown up from the encampment that besieged Babylon on the Nile. Babylon on the Nile was the Roman fortress during the Byzantine era, and it was the place that was under siege when the Arabs came under Amr ibn al-As.
So basically there was no Cairo in ancient Egypt.
There was no Cairo in ancient Egypt, but there was Babylon on the Nile, which was a settlement and a Roman a frontier fortress. And actually it was kind of important because it was an administrative center for the Eastern Roman Empire, if this part of Egypt.
So how would this dynasty, these people show up from somewhere and decide to build a city like Cairo? This must have been...
Well, they had been phenomenally successful. I mean, they're a Shia, Ismaili, which is pretty extreme Shia, or religious ideological movement, which was actually very good at propaganda. And you know, when they came from Morocco, they did phenomenally well by organizing and defeating their rivals. They unified disparate. I mean, you know, they had a huge mercenary army of essentially black troops.
And then they decided we're going to build.
They kept moving east, and of course Egypt's important. You see, the minute you control Egypt, you control vast food resources, and you can export those food resources as a political tool in foreign policy. This has always been one of the things about Egypt, is that you can feed a lot of people and they export food. So it becomes food politics. You control Egypt, you control one of the breadbaskets of the region, and you can then further your ambitions elsewhere, which is essentially what they were able to do. Once they controlled Egypt, which they did, they took Egypt by the sword, at a time when Egypt had been in turmoil because of rivalries between the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad and the governors in Egypt.
We look at the story of the Fatimids, or let's say their role in Egyptian history in very general terms. From a Western perspective, Western Orientalists, Western Middle East scholars, I think they always treat the Fatimids differently than they treat the Abbasids or the Umayyads. I think if you count like Islamic empires, people are not aware that was such an important empire. Like not scholarly, but in general terms, what is the importance of the Fatimid Empire in the Egyptian history?
I think there's a number of things. I think we also, to understand that, we also have to sort of understand a bit of the background here. In 641, when the Muslims come to Egypt, 100% of the population is Christian, plus a very large Jewish minority, very large. By the time of the Fatimids, when the Fatimids come, it's less, but not that much less. It's 35% of the country is a Christian country. Okay? It's not 100% or 90% Muslim, not yet. That will happen at the time of after the Crusades, actually. Okay? But at that time, you have a large Christian population already in Egypt. So that's a very important point. Why are they important? Is because they are able to organize something that the Abbasids had not yet been able to do. They'd been able to organize Egypt's resources to further their empire, thereby bringing Egypt within a certain focus and an understanding of what it represented. Okay? Because in the reality of that historical period, without Egypt, you can't do much. Okay? You can't be a big empire unless you are, simply because you don't have the food. And the Egyptians don't realize, no one really realizes that until the Fatimids come on the scene and start taking advantage of the resources at their disposal in a very efficient way.
What would you say is the historical merit of the Fatimids for this country?
Historical merit, there are a number of things. They come up with a pretty good administrative system which remains in place and is, I mean, it's modified, but the basics are in place until the Ottomans come to Egypt. You know, it goes 500, 600 years later. So they had some pretty good administrative, they had a highly educated system. They were a wealthy empire. I mean, I think one of the things that's not always understood, the Fatimids are fabulously wealthy. They're able to, again, optimize the resources of Egypt to gain that wealth. They also gain that wealth through trade. They also gain that wealth through basically academia. They build a big university here, Azhar. So by building Azhar, they enable themselves to have an academic magnet that is supposed to attract other scientific, and they weren't very successful at it, I might add, at that time. They were much more successful as using the Azhar as a missionary, as a missionary and a propaganda tool to spread their influence into Syria and Lebanon.